I'm Tobias Revel.
And I'm Radha Mystery.
And this is Futur-ish, a podcast about how nothing is new and everything has happened before.
We've been working and playing in futures for over a decade of hype and bluster amidst increasing uncertainty and complexity.
In each episode, we explore a recent event or signal for its historical context and speculate on future possibilities.
And make it make sense for people like you and me. Can I show you my very cool shirt today? Look at this.
I've heard great things. Wow.
How fun is
Look
this shirt?
at I can name Winnie the Pooh and Tigger. I don't know who the other are these. Is this new characters?
No, I mean this is a vintage. I think there's Piglet, there's Eeyore.
And that's about as much as and then I think there's Kanga and Roo. Is that right? I'm not sure. We haven't made it into Winnie the Pooh though. They're more into Bernstein Bears and
Bernstein Bears is the subject of a very famous phenomena. Do you know about this?
how everyone talks about it being Bernstein, but it's Berenstain.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Tobias, you're not the only smart one on this pod. Come on now.
I found a new one the other day, which I didn't know about, which is Tony's Chocolonely. Do you have Tony's Chocolonely in America?
Yes.
Yeah, it's actually Tony's Chocolonely.
Is it really? What?
100%.
Why is he lonely? You make so many friends with chocolate.
So go on, Rada, what's on your mind?
Okay, so, well, there's, as usual, you know how my brain works in loop-de-loops, right? There's no like linear 1 + 2 = 3. So we're recording this on July 2nd. I don't know if you know this, but there's a holiday here in the United States called Independence Day on the 4th of July. And now, frankly speaking,
Traitor
I don't
Day.
really care about it. Yes, basically, you can call it that. Yes, I understand how you might still be hurt about that. And I don't apologize because I do not speak on behalf of this country, but because I don't care enough to. But
it's always convenient when it's not good. It's not my country. When it's great, it's like, yeah, we got Tony Chocolonely over here.
Okay, it's never my country. Let me just say that right off the bat. But I thought it would be interesting to dive a little bit more deeply into like how, nations come about and what the implications of citizenship are. And I stumbled upon, honestly, this one article on Wired and one of my favorite blogs, restofworld.org. Okay, so there's a couple different things. There is this guy named Trey Goff, who's I really hope it's Goff and not Joff. His surname is spelled Goff. So he's the chief of staff of a startup city known as Prospera. The accents on the O. And it's a place in Honduras. Essentially, it's like a special economic zone. That's what it was deemed as. And the previous government of Honduras had said, yeah, this is legal. You guys can kind of do what you want. The whole aim of this like startup city was to be able to essentially kind of like do whatever they want. They called it, having a place for innovation with unbridled regulation, right? So there's a quote in the Wired article that's like, the goal of these cities would be to have places where anti-aging clinical trials, nuclear reactor startups, and building construction can proceed without having to get prior approval from agencies
I've seen this science fiction movie.
The Food and Drug Administration, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the Environmental Protection Agency. So that's one thing, right? And so this guy has this thing in Honduras. Now, the current government in Honduras is pretty hostile towards the idea of this. They don't recognize this city as legal. And essentially, there's like an ongoing lawsuit that's saying that like, hey, you guys are basically squatting in our country illegally. You're not citizens of Honduras. The chief of staff of Prospera actually was born in Venezuela. And then I think he resided in Maryland in the US before going to Honduras to kind of like kick this off. But cities like this, and I believe this one also has the backing of folks like Mark Andreessen and Peter Thiel. Right?
Oh, all good guys. Solid
great guys. Yeah, I know. So there's that piece of it. And then there's also another development called California Forever, which has also been met with a lot of like widespread criticism and is another one of those like, we're just going to pop this city up and it's going to be amazing and it's going to be brilliant and everyone's going to be taken care of and it's going to be the hub of innovation and it's going to be like the spirit of Silicon Valley minus regulation, right? These like micronations.
I think I remember this story and it basically was it wasn't a big announcement. Wasn't there a thing where basically there were a bunch of shell companies gradually buying up parcels of land until they had the whole piece and then we're like, there we go, we got it. So it wasn't a big like, boom, we're going to pop this thing here. It was more like over years, just like building.
It was sneaky. It was very sneaky. And the local citizens of the area felt very misled. And so that did not land well, but it still is kind of in existence. So there's that piece. And I read this article in the New Republic that There's this line, in reality, the scheme is a techno-fascist vision of the future that's been quietly but persistently pushed and funded by billionaires such as Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, Brian Armstrong, and Sam Altman for years. Despite the shiny marketing materials for places like Prospera and California Forever, which make outlandish promises of futuristic utopias, the startup city as a concept is a modern, ketamine-infused repackaging of something that flopped into obsolescence long ago, the company town. Okay, so just hold that. So hold that in your brain. You can see why I'm so excited about stuff like this, because there's so many dots connecting from historical references, right? And we love, especially on this podcast, to talk about how there are new things, but we've seen them before. There are patterns of change that we can recognize. And so hopefully it helps to kind of like help folks find a pathway through things that feel very uncertain and volatile in this moment, right? Okay, so park that wherever you need to in your brain, in your big, beautiful brain. And
I'm going to write it down actually on a piece of paper. Is that okay? What was it again?
Do whatever you need to do, my friend.
Ketamine Company Town. Got it.
Got it? Did you spell that correctly? Because you know it can go wrong in so many different ways.
Ketamine with an E.
Yes. Okay, so we've got like these startups. So essentially, there's this cohort of folks who have like put together Prospera and California Forever. They've now approached Donald Trump, and Donald Trump has decided to rebrand these as freedom cities. And essentially what they are these cities that essentially don't have to respond to any federal regulation or even any state level or local regulation. They can kind of do what they want. And it's freedom to innovate. It's freedom to invest in new technologies, new pharmaceuticals. Now, we can already start to see that there's like 100 things wrong here, right? But then I found this charming little website called letsbuyAnisland.com. Have you heard of this before?
Not.
Okay. So if you go on the website, they have like this little blog, and one of the articles talks about island dream citizenship by investment and the art of buying islands. So essentially what it is was like a crowd-funded scheme where people could invest in this island and buy it up. The island is called Coffee Cay, and they would have kind of access to the island. They would have citizenship rights to it. And it almost feels like a timeshare, but it's an island as opposed to like a built property. But what they're calling it is a micronation. And they're going off of the model where, you know, places like Estonia, where they're allowing like digital citizenship as long as you are kind of economically invested in the region. So it's going off of that model a little bit. Okay. So there's that island called Coffee Cay. It's trying to be a micronation. They want to be able to kind of like make up their own rules and laws. And they're doing a similar thing to these startup cities where they want to attract folks who really subscribe to the like Silicon Valley, move fast, break things. Let's just innovate and get shit done and see what's out there.
Where is Coffee Cay, and who currently has sovereignty over it?
It's an island in the heart of Belize, a hidden gem in the Caribbean.
It's worth noting that IBG Inc., the company behind Let's Buy an Island, are registered in the Cayman Islands, which is always a sign of good, honest dealings.
Of course. That's where my accountant lives. So the island is about 7 kilometers off the coast of Belize City. It's reachable in about 15 minutes by boat, but it apparently was uninhabited.
So it's a principality of Belize. So it's sort of a semi-autonomous territory that's still actually under the sovereignty of Belize.
Yes, but these folks who have bought the island and have ownership over, I believe, the land are now calling it a micronation. Essentially, anyone who kind of buys into that scheme is a citizen of that micronation. And so they're saying that because we are economically kind of invested in this land, we have legislative rights over that land. So there's a few different things going on here, right? One, there's the company town, right, which is not a new idea. During the Industrial Revolution, there were, especially in the United States, there were so many companies that would kind of like pop up a town as part of the building of the railroads or mining or whatever it might be, right? And then those kind of set the foundation for where population started to grow in different parts around the United States. Is that the same as the United Kingdom? Tobias?
It's not such a thing, because obviously in most cases the Industrial Revolution was simply the growth of existing cities. Where there are new cities in the UK and even in other parts of Europe, they're often more driven by social projects. So whether it's things like garden cities, which were a big thing in the Industrial Revolution, which were ways of getting people out of the cities and having clean air and setting up new principles around new forms of transport, it's not usually around a company. It's usually around a sort of social or socio-political moment.
So the recorded experiences, the anecdotal kind of narratives that come out of those spaces is that they actually were really horrible for the quality of life. Folks were essentially kind of beholden to these like fiefdom schemes where they were getting paid in the currency of the local kind of company town. Surveillance was always an issue. And so you were beholden to whoever was kind of running the show, whoever was in power, right? And then you kind of flash forward to maybe the early 2000s, 2010s, and you're seeing companies like Amazon, Google, and Meta starting to really flirt with that concept again. And I think, Tobias, when you and I were baby foresight researchers at Arup, I remember coming up on a signal about startups wanting to, was it buy out cruise ships?
Yeah.
Do you remember this?
So buying out cruise ships or establishing offshore settlements where they could operate in international law. And I think there was an idea from Eric Schmidt of Google of getting a bunch of land in the desert somewhere. But I think he was almost directly inspired by Ayn Rand. I think he just read Ayn Rand and was like, yeah, I'm going to do that.
So that then brings us here where we have a president of a country like the United States who sees some legitimacy in a scheme like this, right? Because typically we've been able to say, okay, regulatory kind of safeguards will ensure that something like this doesn't happen. And again, I can only speak from the current context I sit in the United States, but we're seeing this also travel to places like Honduras with Prospera. So there's that piece of it, which like from a regulatory framework standpoint, what starts to happen when there are no laws, rules, ways of doing things for research and for testing. And I don't know if you know, but currently, Tobias, in the United States, a lot of our institutional knowledge and research programs are being slashed in funding if they seem to misalign with the values of the current administration, meaning research for women's health, research for people of color, research for trans folks. That research is getting kind of slashed. And so what I'm starting to see, at least from where I sit, is like if the research for that kind of stuff is getting slashed, and if we're seeing this emergence of potential, at least support for a concept like a startup city, right, where there is no regulation, where you can kind of allow innovation to move forward without any kind of safeguards, what happens? What kind of future are we ushering in? And then the other piece of this that I thought was really interesting, which I have been interested by for quite a while actually, is this idea of like, what does it mean to build a new nation in these times? And what does citizenship look like when a lot of these things are happening digitally, like the crowdfunding? Most of the folks that invested in Coffee Key hadn't visited it. I think the piece that tickles my brain a little bit, not in the best of ways, is the fact that like there are folks who have lots of capital and who have lots of regulatory power now who can facilitate something like this actually coming to fruition again in a context that doesn't necessarily do good for people or
do
planet.
Do you think it actually will though? Because my initial reaction to the startup cities thing and also the micronations thing is that these things are always coming around. There's always one. They splash up something and then they have negligible impact if they even get off the ground. You know, I was looking at Principality of Sealand, which is an offshore micronation that was started in 1967 in the UK, off the East Coast, actually, quite near Essex. And currently has one remaining resident and was basically an abandoned Second World War sea fort that was claimed by the family of Paddy Roy Bates. And they've done all sorts of stuff like use it for server space. And there's obviously been Bitcoin involved because anything like this involves Bitcoin at some point or another.
Yeah.
But it feels like they're good things. They get a bit of press. Everyone sort of has a off and then they move on.
So here's the thing that feels different about all of this is like, you know, billionaires are going to be billionaires. They're going to try to kind of do shit like this all the time. But usually what happens, at least in the United States, we have folks who are writing the laws and voting on things that are in the interest of at least maintaining balance. They might not be trying to like save the world or help people, but it's like at least they're trying not to ruffle feathers. And I don't know if you know who our current president is.
Remind me. I'm sure the name will come to me.
But, you know, it just feels like it's like the perfect storm. I just don't know if like the system of, you know, our system of checks and balances would temper this in a way that it would need to. And I also think that what we're starting to see is like the folks who really want to do the startup cities or the freedom cities or whatever you want to call them, they're going to find ways to do it.
I'm going to be cynical. If startup investors and venture capitalists want to do something that's unethical and borderline illegal, they'll just do it. Or they'll do it somewhere else, right? You know, they'll just go and do it. They don't need to have this agreement. In the UK, we have a thing called free ports, which are, a less extreme version of that. They're basically port towns largely, which tend to be some of the most dilapidated places in the UK because of the change in economic fortunes in ports, where there's like easier customs agreements, capital tax breaks, all sorts of stuff like that. And other than a massive corruption scandal around a councillor selling £100 million worth of assets for about 100 quid, there's they're sort of unremarkable in a way. And if you look at any nation of major size, they'll have sort of similar arrangements somewhere. China's got a bunch of special economic zones, for example. They're not necessarily that remarkable. Could you imagine if Google went, great, fantastic, we can finally do human cloning?
But what if they did? That's what it's starting to feel like. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and actually, to be honest with you, in this day and age, what's left to surprise us really. But it feels like it needs more than just the opportunity. It needs the motivation as well in order to.
But it needs
the
money,
stuff.
and the money is there. Do you know what I'm saying? Like the money's there, the people are there, the regulatory power is there. Of course, we can hope that reality will set in and things like this will continue to be the exception to the rule. But in the event that it's not, what kind of future are we inviting in?
So what these say to me, and all these artifacts say, whether it's, we're going to build our own nation or we're going to set up free ports, is there a way of constructing and isolating a narrative device of what the future should be for your politics, whether that's the freedom to innovate and develop whatever startup you want, or indeed the history of cults and communes and movements who've done the same thing, right? Where it's like, this is our social utopia and we're going to build it over here, or indeed, your Bitcoin utopia or whatever it is.
I think for me, it's like, I question, why does physical land ownership seem to be such a goal of parties like this? Why does physical land ownership still hold so much power over us?
I think it's a continuum of a phenomenon that's quite common in technology. So if we take technological companies, let's say technology companies, as bureaucracies, which is essentially what they are ways of processing information, and the information comes in from users and goes back to users or whatever it is. But that's essentially what they are. All bureaucracies have a model of the world that they operate on, like a model of what is important to look at, what's important to optimize, what's not important, what you can ignore, what you can cut, and everything else. James C. Scott writes about this in Seeing Like a State. If you haven't read it, it's probably one of the most important books of all time, and I find it being increasingly referenced, which is great because it was written in the early 90s. And he was writing about this idea that for the state, and he is referring to states in this example, that there's this project of 3 stages. So one is you map the territory. Let's say you're farming. You map the territory, so you figure out what there is. And then you see what the conditions are that allow for the optimum use of that territory. So in the case of farming, like the optimum yield of, let's say, corn or something. And then you redesign the territory in the shape of the simulation you've just built. So you've just simulated the best way of growing corn, and then you reshape it in that territory, which is how you end up with, factory farms and battery chickens and everything else. That's what the worldview is. Now, I think a similar thing happens in technology companies where they say, but we've built like the perfect society in our platform and it works perfectly fine. I don't know why you're struggling so much, governments. I think we could probably come in and do just as better job. But you've selectively chosen what you think is important and what good looks like in your territory amongst usually, in most cases, a willing set of users. So you just go, well, everyone here is happy, so I don't see why you're struggling. We're going to go and do your job for you. And of course, it's never that straightforward, because then you end up encountering real world complexity where you don't have direct control of all of the levers of power. I mean, it was interesting reading Sarah Wynne Williams's Careful People, which is the expose of the internecine management backbiting of Facebook and Meta. It becomes really apparent that they genuinely think that way, right? That Mark Zuckerberg is genuinely like, this isn't hard. I effectively run a country with billions of people in it. Like, I could do that.
But there's a little bit of like manifest destiny happening here. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, at what point does that stop being relevant? Like, why must you seek out the next frontier? I wonder if there's like a neurological or psychological kind of condition
behavioral
here.
Evolutionary thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
It's quite possibly. And it also reminds me a bit of there was a great little project here in the UK called the Peckham Outer Space Initiative.
Oh, dear Lord. Peckham wanted to go to outer space. How cute.
Yeah. This was, again, at this period, same period we were talking about, where lots of people were talking about we're all going to colonize Mars and private space flights kicking off. The subtitle of the book was GTFO Earth. their thesis, which I really liked actually, which was kind of cute, was that actually for large parts, I can't say if it's most of, but potentially is most of human history, people were nomadic. They weren't tied to particular patches of land. They moved around, they followed herds, they followed the seasons, they traveled. And it's only sort of, again, if you read, and we're throwing loads of books out here, but David Graeber and David Wennegro's amazing book, another one that you absolutely must read, Dawn of Everything, they sort of question the myth of urbanization as a driving narrative in history. But nonetheless, there was definitely a point where we started to settle more and establish crops and develop domestication, at which point we did get tied to the land and that became baked into something.
So this is something we've probably been tracking for 12 years at least, right? And it's been in multiple iterations. But this feels different because I think there is a moment at this moment in time, I think I think people want a sense of belonging. I think folks want something new. I think that there are so many folks who are just fed up with the way our current systems operate. And that is all the way from the public sector into the private sector, right? With technological innovation, with research, with the way that we legislate, all of that. And so you throw into that kind of perfect storm of people feeling disenfranchised within the current structures that they have been embedded in, and sometimes to no fault of their own. And then you add in the kind of fantasy, the manifest destiny piece of there's something better out there, and it is my obligation, my duty, my right to be able to seek that out. And you have the funding and you have the regulatory structures in place. And then you have this hero figure who emerges in the president of the United States that's saying yes, this is the best idea in the world. And it just feels different because the structures have kind of been laid out digitally, right? There are these communities that feel very connected to one another, that align on values. We see this in the siloing of social media structures and stuff like that. And so it just feels like all of the pieces are starting to fit into place now. Where 12 years ago, social media was there, but I don't think it was there to the degree that it is now. Do you know what I'm saying? The general public was not identifying with their digital persona or their digital avatar. Yes, there were some niches of folks who were starting to do that and kind of finding a sense of citizenship in those cohorts. But I just feel like all the pieces are starting to come together in a way that makes this feel the same and different all at once, if that makes sense. And now you can disagree with me and tell me I'm wrong, but go ahead.
I mean, I think they are a signal, but as I said, I think they are an artifact that is the byproduct of the sort of political discord and power shifting that you're describing. And they occur always at these junctures, whether it's the sort of smart cities of the 90s and Songdo and Milton Keynes, or the company towns of the 50s and 60s, as you said, or the free ports of the UK in the 2000s. They are okay, this is how we can physicalize and manifest both our power and our story of what we think the future of our sort of world should be, our socioeconomic conditions should be. Equally against that, you always have the I'm going to go and start my own thing, micronation, or I'm going to go and invade another territory, right? That is also a response to political problems, as in the French Revolution, or indeed declare independence, as in the famous backstabbing by the United States against the British in 1776. They're major benefactors and trading partners. just a shot in the dark. What I would throw in here to end on, maybe not to end on, I don't have to have the last word, it'd be nice, but I don't need it.
You can have the last word.
I've got other things. Is the one thing I think that is a new sound in this area is the bioregionalism. And actually, I think this is relatively new. And so we are seeing, and I mean in our work at Arup, but also in other, particularly metropolitan spheres, to be fair, this idea that political geographies are part of the problem with sustainability, that actually an emphasis on this is the borders of the town, this is the border of this water company's territory, we're only responsible for this forest, are a major problem with dealing with systemic complexity. So pushing for boundaries that go across catchment areas, go across bioregions, go across migration pathways that all overlap, but recognize the natural flows of materials will be a much more straightforward and easier way to both comprehend and tackle the systemic impacts of climate change and the biodiversity crisis. And I think from my understanding of history, it's the first time in a long time, maybe thousands of years, that people have started to define boundaries by biological phenomena as opposed to political phenomena. I suppose geographic phenomena were the origin of nations. We go up to the mountain, we go up to the river. But you know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you think people will do it that way, though? I love that idea.
Mm.
And I love the climate angle, and I think that's honestly one of the only ways we solve or address the climate crisis. But
I think it goes to means, motive, opportunity, as we were talking about. The means aren't there at the moment because everyone's too tied to layers and layers of bureaucracy and political geographies that tie them to certain things. But the motivation's there. You know, if you're a water utility company looking at dealing with wastewater, there's a motivation for you to be able to model, capture, and work across the entire water system, not just within the bit that's for you, because it might mean that you don't get fined as much for wastewater. And then opportunity, I think, is somewhat enabled by technology. You know, I love to bring AI into everything, but because I'm such a great booster of AI, but the opportunity to process vast amounts of data at a much faster scale and make it mutable to human understanding enabled by AI does mean that you could take that kind of layer of systemic complexity and make it navigable and understandable in, you know, in an interface or in your hand or whatever. So it's just, you know, means, motive, opportunity in some of the conversations I'm hearing at work. I think that's a thing that feels like, you know, has some legs as a relatively new way of thinking about territory, or actually a very old way of thinking about territory that's just coming back.
I see your point, and I want your point to be the way forward. I think I'm too cynical sitting where I am right now. I just think that's what it is. Do you know what I'm saying?
I mean, these things look different from wherever you are, right? Like if you're the person who's setting up that offshore island where you're going to have an amazingly successful micronation, probably you genuinely believe it.
But also, if you look at the photos like on that blog and you look at the demographic of people who are investing in Coffee Key, it doesn't look like the folks the cohort you are talking about who are interested in saving the planet.
No, but then there's
I think
four
that's
of
part
them.
of the problem. I mean, yeah, but they could reproduce.
There's like four of them, and there's like 19,500 climate scientists who work on IPCC,
and their funding is being cut. But
they still work harder.
Oh, that's true. But anyway.
All right.
Listen, my friend.
Lovely to chat to you.
Always a pleasure.
Always. Speak to you later. Look forward to 3 hours of editing this. All right. Bye.
I promise I'll watch it right when you finish it.
Have a good one. See you later.
All right. Bye.